My name is Malcolm Skinner and I'm a solicitor in the LexisNexis Private Client PSL team. Today I'm joined by Jacqui Lazare, a solicitor with Royds Withy King. Jacqui is a member of STEP's Philanthropy Advisors Special Interest Group and sat on the recent Charity Law Association working parties on the Charities Protection and Social Investment Act 2016, and it's that act which we're going to discuss today. Welcome, Jacqui.
Thank you.
Just to start with, and very briefly, what does the new act do and why was it introduced?
The new Act received royal assent back in March this year, and it seeks to address gaps in the Charity Commission's powers, protective powers, but significantly introduces some other changes regarding disqualification of trustees most particularly, and charities. All charities will need to be aware of this.
And so far as implementation is concerned, are we there? Are we waiting? What's the score?
We're very nearly there. The Cabinet Office set out a detailed implementation timetable earlier this year, and most of the provisions were implemented in July, the remainder to be dealt with in November and then next April.
So for our charity clients, what do they need to be aware of?
Well, there are three main areas for change. The first would be extending the Charity Commission's powers to disqualify trustees. Secondly, the area relating to fundraising, and lastly, new social investment provisions. The main area is that relating to disqualification of trustees and the power to give official warnings. Well,
bearing in mind we seem to need a new act, that begs the question of what protective powers did the Commission have prior to the introduction of the 2016 Act?
You're right, it did have powers, existing protective powers, and these were mostly statutory provisions or flowed from statutes and enabled the Commission to identify and investigate mismanagement or misconduct of a charity's administration, and then to take protective steps or in some cases even remedial action. The powers actually help the Commission to meet its own statutory objectives. Its very reason for being to help promote and protect the public and promote public confidence in charities, but also to promote compliance by charities in their administration.
So for instance, what sort of protective powers did they have prior to this Act?
There were a number of protective powers, but in particular I think the main one would have been the power to open inquiries. This was contained within the 2011 Act, known as a Section 46 inquiry, and it meant that the Commission had a power to initiate an investigation where it would only be used in very serious cases where there was notice of or risk of significant financial loss to a charity, or where harm could or had taken place in respect of a beneficiary, particularly a vulnerable beneficiary of a charity. And if an inquiry needs to be opened, then the Charity Commission had investigative powers that it could deploy. Where an inquiry hadn't been opened, there were other powers that it had in relation to information gathering, such as searching records or asking for documents and things like that.
Well, patently this Act is very significant, there can be no doubt about that. And it introduces new powers. So what have we got in the way of new powers?
Well, the new powers are, you're right, absolutely wide-ranging. They include, one, the ability to give official warnings, and where, for example, misconduct or mismanagement has taken place. Two, extending the circumstances under which the Commission can automatically disqualify a trustee. And thirdly, again, relating to the disqualification of trustees, where they find that a person is not fit to act in that capacity.
Yeah, the disqualification is, as you have said, the new one, and the one that's going to cause the most, can I say, interest, certainly worry for some trustees, I imagine.
Some discomfort,
discomfort, that's a very good word for it. So when is it likely that a disqualification order might be made?
The Act sets out three tests which must be satisfied before that happens. One, well, the tests are, one would be the first one is the conditions test, and this is where at least one of 6 conditions are met. An example would be where a trustee is found to have been cautioned for a disqualifying offence. The next test would be the fitness test, where the Commission has found that a trustee is unfit to act. And the third test relates to the public interest test, which is seeking to promote confidence and trust in charities generally.
Yeah. I have seen it said on many occasions since the Act was, the bill was introduced, that these discretionary powers are far too wide. How has the Commission dealt with that criticism?
Yeah, well, it's interesting you asked that. That's absolutely right. There is concern in that respect, and I think the reaction to the Act is that it is absolutely an attempt to rectify that lack of confidence and introduce a more obviously robust set of powers for the Commission. One of the main concerns, like you say, is that the powers are too wide, and so far in response to that, the Commission has set out some draft guidance which is open to the public for consultation, and I sat on that on the Charity Law Association Working Party you mentioned, and it was clear from that there was still a lot more detail and clarity needed. So it will be very interesting to see how the Commission responds to the feedback from the sector.
If that wasn't enough, I understand we have some other provisions as well included.
We do. There are two more areas, the new fundraising provisions and new social investment provisions. The fundraising provisions have actually been around for some time and generally set out the main requirements that charities need to be aware of when entering into contracts with professional fundraisers. But following some high-profile scandals over the last few years, the calls have been made for more robust regulation or provisions to be introduced. So the new fundraising provisions that have been introduced by the Act cover supplementary provisions, so requiring charities to provide more information and to demonstrate how they are protecting the public, in particular vulnerable members of the public, and also how they are monitoring their own compliance, so what processes they have in place. Secondly, the new provisions require charities which must be audited to set out details of their fundraising activities in an annual report to their trustees. And thirdly, more generally supplementing those existing powers that I mentioned, and in particular a reserve power where the government could force registration with a new fundraising regulator, and if there's no independent one created, then maybe the Charity Commission.
Yeah, I mean, is this enough, do you think? Is this last chance saloon for charities?
That's exactly what it's regarded as, yes, absolutely. So it'll be interesting to see how it works out. Certainly this is meant to reassure people and reassure the public, but there's also that big warning to the charity sector, remembering that 99.9% of the time they're all operating perfectly satisfactorily. Yeah, charities do need to be aware of the new provisions because they will all have to comply with them. Okay,
that's great. The new word, well, it's not a new wording, social investment has been around with us for a little while, and obviously it's grown. Can you tell us a little bit more about social investment in the context of the charities and how they're looking at it and how they're dealing with it, given the new powers and provisions?
Yeah, certainly. So social investment is where you can provide capital to a social enterprise or a charity, and that capital is then able to provide a financial and a social benefit. The investment, what makes it a social investment, is that it is repayable, but it's sometimes with and sometimes without interest or any kind of return that's expected. This kind of social investment is intended to generate new income and activities for social enterprises or charities. A social investment tax relief was introduced in 2014 to encourage this kind of investment. The government is trying to encourage investment in this area, in social enterprises, to complement the traditional methods of donating and things like that. It's a good tax relief. You're able to, somebody who qualifies will have donated to a particular investment, and it's who subscribes for shares or makes a debt investment in a qualifying social enterprise. When they do this, they can deduct 30% of the amount of that invested from their income tax liability in that year, up to a maximum cap of £1 million of the value of the investment.
Substantial tax relief.
Yes, yeah. absolutely, and absolutely designed to encourage this kind of thing. For charities too, they can also make social investments. In these cases, it's more generally referred to as programme-related investments, but it means that charities are free to make these kinds of investments, and the new provisions make it much clearer on which basis they can do so.
Right. So far as the sector are concerned, do you think the charity sector has welcomed these new provisions? I imagine they're not too happy about the disqualification ones, but generally, do they like them?
I think overall, insofar as the social investment provisions are concerned, I think these will be welcomed.
Right.
But I think generally speaking, you're right, there is more concern. Touching first on the social investment provisions, bit more of a positive news story. Certainly, I think in respect of how philanthropists and charities will react, it will be positive. It's a recognition of of how well established this area of giving has come along. It's getting more embedded, I think, now, and the new provisions allow trustees to invest their charities' money now, even if they're not guaranteed a financial return, which is really positive as well from the social investment perspective. I think insofar as this, again, sticking with the social investment, as far as that's concerned, this growth has been recognised. There should be this positive knock-on effect for charities through philanthropists as well, because they are very much seeking to become more engaged, analysing the impact that their investment is having on charities, and so forth. And this is something that's becoming a much more common requirement for charities.
We all know the Charity Commission has had a few brickbats thrown at it over the last few months, if not the last few years. How's it going to cope with all these new powers and provisions?
Well, it will be interesting to see how it bears out. Certainly, as the Act was going through Parliament, a lot of concern was expressed that the new powers. Yeah, absolutely. A lot of concern was expressed that the powers being granted to the Commission were too wide, and that the Commission itself is not in a position to exercise these powers properly, especially given the pressure it's going to be under from its own budget cuts. And following on from that pressure, it will not be able to exercise the necessary judgment needed to wield these new powers, especially such wide discretionary powers. So there are some concerns, and these concerns do need to be addressed, because there could be a risk that charity trustees, new or existing trustees, may be deterred from serving in that capacity. Certainly, supporters of the Act have stressed its intention to support the good work being done by charities, and stressed that the new powers are only there to deal with a few bad apples, clear reference to the bad press, and also to tackle the fundraising provisions, which will really tap into the concern felt by the public. We can't know whether these concerns are addressed until some more time has passed. So we need to wait and see whether or not the Charities Commission takes on board the feedback recently given to it following its consultation.
As you say, wait and see.
Thank you.
Jacqui, thank you very much. That was excellent. Much obliged to you for coming in.
My pleasure. Thanks, Malcolm.